Greetings from Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to paint a Chaos Combat Patrol. Let's go. Thanks for joining me in the studio. This week, you and I complete our year-long monthly Combat Patrol Challenge. But first, I want to take a brief second to talk about the rainy season in Japan. Right at the end of spring, just before the unbearably humid and hot summer arrives, there is a month of pretty solid rain. From mid-May to mid-June of every year, it's a pretty good idea to take an umbrella with you wherever you go. Now, Japan is known the world over for being an incredibly safe and well-mannered society, and believe it or not, I have personally seen a wallet dropped near a subway station that stayed in the exact same spot for a week and a half. Now, despite all of this, there are a few small exceptions to this behavior, and one of those is umbrella theft. Now, I know, but as silly as it sounds, it is not uncommon to put your umbrella in the rack outside of a convenience store or a cafe, and when you come out, it's just gone. But I can tell you, in the 4 years that I've been here, I've been through more umbrellas than I have in my entire life. And for some places safe and well-mannered as Japan, that can feel a little chaotic. And speaking of chaos, the final Combat Patrol in our year-long monthly Combat Patrol Challenge is the brand new Chaos Space Marines Combat Patrol launched in June. And while I am excited to paint them, there's another reason why I'm excited to tackle this Combat Patrol. This month's sponsor is the Army Painter. They have recently reformulated their entire paint line and launched the Fanatic range of paints, and they've sent me the Mega Set in order to try it out. Now, the set contains 50 paints from their brand new reformulated Fanatic paint range, including metallics, shades, effect paints, and layer paints. So we're going to use those exclusively to tackle the final Combat Patrol in our challenge. So let me show you how I built and painted a Night Lord's Combat Patrol. If you're going to build this kit, there's something you need to know right away. As this is one of the newer Combat Patrols, Games Workshop has updated their instructions to indicate which build is for the Combat Patrol, only it's wrong. The instructions clearly indicate that you should build all the Legionnaires with only bolt rifles, but that's not correct. If you look at the datasheet for the Combat Patrol, you definitely need some specialized weapons like meltas and heavy bolters, so make sure to keep track of those as you're building. Now, the kit went together really easily. Again, Games Workshop, they're second to none when it comes to the technical aspect. The details and poses on these are great, and while the helmets are really cool, because we're doing Night Lords, we have to do something special, so I found this Nightmare Harbinger's Battle Squad helmet set over on Cultists. They have those bat wings we need, and the Aspiring Champion's wings are actually made out of flayed faces. But there was a problem. The necks were a bit too short. Fortunately, that's fixed with a little super glue and green stuff, and when we set the helmets in place, they were the right height. The Aspiring Champion is supposed to be equipped with a brutal melee weapon, and I found this really great Night Lords themed axe for free on Cults, so I printed one of those and attached it to the model. And once all the parts were together, we began priming. I use a Vallejo polyurethane surface primer. It goes on really smooth, but it also brushes on very well if you don't have an airbrush. Now, normally, after a black prime, I would do a zenithal or top-down prime with a white so that our colors would be more vibrant. But because we're doing Night Lords, we want that sort of deep, midnight blue. So I'm going to use Imperial Navy from the Fanatic Mega Set and apply that over all the armor panels. With our primary colors in place, I moved on to my metallics, and in this case, I'm using Plate Mail Metal from the Fanatic set. The coverage is really great. As you can see here, it goes over the dark blue in a single coat. And once I had my metallics done, I moved on to the tabard. Here, I'm using pure red. This is a really vibrant red, and it actually covers in 2 thin coats over a dark color like this blue, but covers in a single coat over a white prime. Once I had those base layers in, I went and used the dark tone. This is sort of like a Games Workshop shade, only it's suspended in this interesting gel medium, which makes it sort of stay in place where you put it. Unlike other shades or washes, it doesn't run down quickly to the bottom of the model and pool up. It just kind of sticks where you place it, and I Found it took a little getting used to, but once I understood how it worked, I actually preferred it over a traditional shade or wash. With that in place, I then moved on to my golds. Here I'm using Greedy Gold, another really great metallic from the set. This covers in a single layer as well, as you can see, and it has this warm, lustrous feel to it. Now normally I like to put an earth tone underneath my golds when I have the opportunity, but in this case it just wasn't necessary. I then used oak brown on all the holsters and utility pouches on their belts. This is a really rich, deep brown, and the coverage is exceptional. Moving on to their face masks, I applied a layer of ancient stone. Now, quite often these light sort of sand colors from other paint ranges take several coats, but this one covered in a single coat again, and it just had to be careful with my 00 brush to make sure we didn't mess up any of the armor we had already finished. When that was done, I used strong tone to shade the mask and the bolt rounds on the rifle, and of course, all of the gold trim around the model. I let that dry, and then I highlighted all the gold elements using a combination of Greedy Gold and plate mail. After finishing the eyes with pure red, the only thing left to do was apply the decals. Now, fortunately, on the included decal sheet, there are some Night Lord's transfers, so I went ahead and applied a gloss varnish, allowed that to dry, and then applied the water labels. There's a separate tutorial for this on my channel, and I'll link that in the corner right now. I like to make sure my bases are themed, and at this point I've done 12 of these combat patrols, so to shake it up, I broke these out of my old pile of shame. These are some sculptural bases that I purchased years ago for the 2017 edition of Kill Team and never really used, so I set those up for a gang paint, applied some deep gray to the rims of the bases, and then, using a technique called overbrushing, I took plate mail metal, put it on my brush, wiped some of it off, not as much as you would for a dry brush, and then applied that to the metallic surfaces of the base. With the base metallic down, I moved on to weapon bronze for some visual variety, just sort of using it sparingly. Here I'm using strong tone to shade the metallics. It gives a really nice oily patina to them. And some of the bases have the opportunity for some additional details. Here I'm using demonic yellow and matte black to create some hazard stripe zones. And once those paints are dry, we'll go ahead back to that strong tone and just shade those to knock them back and unify the bases together. With those done, we'll pop them off their temporary bases and use some plastic glue to connect them, finishing off our Legionnaires. Moving on to the Possessed. I was really looking forward to these. They're this sort of brutal close combat unit, even bigger than the Legionnaires are. The kit went together really easily. There are a few options here where you can swap out some of the mutated arms, but generally they're all mono build. So once I got them together, I went ahead and primed them, of course, with the airbrush. And in this case, because we want our skin tones to show up really well, I'm going to go ahead and do a zenithal of a white prime over any of the flesh areas. And just like on the Legionnaires, we'll apply Imperial Navy directly over the black prime to get that really gorgeous midnight blue effect. And we'll move on to the skin tones. Not only does the kit have some really great sort of Caucasian skin tones, they have some really great darker skin tones as well. This is onyx skin. As you can see, the coverage is really great. It goes over a white prime in a single coat, looks really smooth, doesn't clog up the details. Once I have that down, I'm going to use soft tone here and apply that all over, bring out sort of the shadows and other details. Once that's dry, we'll go back in with a little onyx skin and a 000 brush to start bringing the highlights out of these muscles. And then in order to keep things from looking chalky, we're going to go to topaz skin next and just hit the very highlights of some of these higher muscles and sort of edge details. Now I'm going to work my way around the model here, getting all of the teeth, claws, and horns, skulls, anything else that needs to be ancient stone. We'll apply that with a brush. And again, unlike a lot of other sort of sandy colors, this seems to go on in a single coat over a lighter prime, which is actually really great. With those dry, we're going to apply soft tone to all of those. And here, I'm just using a larger brush to apply it really generously. It's okay, we're going to let this sort of, again, these don't really pool up, but we let them move down the shapes to sort of darken them. And then as you'll see later on, I use some darker tones on those. Plate mail metal for all of our silver metallics. This one's really good. It covers really cleanly. And in the case of the Possessed, I wanted to experiment a little and see what the difference was in the Greedy Gold if I put down an earth tone under it. So here we're using oak brown. I'm going to apply that on all the trim. And once that's set, I'm going to use dark tone to do all my sort of recess and pin washing. Again, this is really great because it doesn't run everywhere. It just sort of stays where you put it. Once those are done, I'm going to use Greedy Gold over top of that Oak Brown. And it does make a bit of a difference. Again, this will cover on its own over that dark blue in a single coat. But I just wanted to experiment here and see what sort of a difference it made. It's subtle and the camera doesn't really pick up on it, but it's a step you can skip because you end up painting the trim twice. And good God, the trim on these models nearly drove me insane as it was. Here, once the golds are down, we're going to use strong tone to shade all of this. I'll just work my way around applying that into the recesses and giving the model some dimensionality. Metallics can become really flat really quickly, so once that shade's done, we'll go back through with that combination of plate mail metal and Greedy Gold and just hit some highlights, bring out the high points, and keep it from looking flat and lifeless. One of the last things we're going to do here is use True Blood. Here I'm just using an old ratty brush to make it look like it's been dragged across. If this thing was in a slicing motion, it would look like that. And then a really fun trick, load up an old brush and then hit it with the airbrush. Sorry about the focus here, but you can see you get this really great splatter effect. Moving on to the HQ unit, the Master of Possession. I remembered I had these as I was digging out those old bases. This is from the Heroic base set, but it's a little too tall for my taste. It's just a little much. So I realized I could just simply slowly slice away the bottom step and sort of carve away the back of the rock. Here I'm using a small coping saw and some thick leather gloves to make sure I don't maul myself as I'm doing this, but it cut apart pretty easily, and then I just sanded the bottom surface on some rough sandpaper and then resealed them together. Once that was all together, I simply glued it down to the provided 40mm base, and that one was ready to go. Moving on to the assembly of this, it's another mono pose build, but honestly the model looks really cool and I've wanted to build this for a long time. Here I'm just using some plastic cement to secure the model together. Unfortunately the chest didn't want to go together perfectly, there was a seam along the side, so here I just used some dollar store clamps to make sure that was a tighter fit, and then finished building the model once it had set. We've applied that Imperial Navy over the black prime for our midnight blue. And moving on to the cloak, we're going to use pure red. Now this is over a black, and incredibly, it only took 3 coats to get complete coverage over that. I could have used a zenithal here, but honestly I didn't feel like switching colors in the airbrush, and so I just applied these, and it only took a few minutes. I used a hairdryer to dry them in between layers, and before you knew it, I had a perfect red layer over the black prime. Once the base layer was down, I switched to Basilisk Red, which is sort of a darker, almost umber red, and I used that to do the shading along the bottom of the capes and anywhere where there was a deep fold or crease in the fabric. Once I'd laid in my shadows, it was time to bring out my highlights, and in this case, I used a combination of lava orange and pure red in a 1-to-1 mix, and sort of brushed that along the highest ridges in the folds to bring out the contrast between the deepest shadows and the brightest highlights. I then worked my way around the model using ash gray for anything that would be a lighter color, and oak brown for anything that would be a leather or a gold. Once I had those down, I went ahead and shaded the model using dark tone. Again, this took some getting used to, but I'm really starting to favor it over a traditional wash, as it just sort of goes in the recesses and stays put. It's actually pretty great. I went ahead and applied some deep gray to the fur and feather shoulder dress, and some ancient stone anywhere that there was going to be bone, in this case like the helmet or the skulls on his necklace or the bone knife hanging from his waist. I went through that and applied Greedy Gold to all of my surfaces that were going to be gold. Again, this is over top of that oak brown, and I don't know if it makes a difference, but it's an HQ model, so we want to kind of church it up. Here we're using soft tone over top of all of the ancient stone that we applied earlier. It actually does a really good job of dropping into the recesses and making things look like a sort of ancient or like a weathered bone. We'll apply some dark tone to the fur and feathers over top of his shoulders, and then here over top of this we're going to apply some rainforest. This is this incredibly punchy, like almost super fluorescent green that's included in the Fanatic paint set, and I wanted some sort of warp elemental fire, not some traditional fire. I really wanted it to stand out. Once that was down, we used green skin and then just dry brush that along the top of the flame shapes. That's going to give us a really easy gradient and accentuate those shapes. And then we'll take some plastic cement and attach him to his sculptural base. Now, don't think I had forgotten the Chaos Cultist. I just had been driven nearly mad by all the gold trim on the Legionnaires, Possessed, and Master of Possession, and these guys had just sort of been sitting on the side of my table, and I just sort of saved them for last. I wanted to get to them very quickly. It's a chaff unit. They're They're meant to die instantly on the table or block in advance. The great thing about these models, though, is the proportions, like the new Astra Militarum, are really much more realistic, and there's no repeat poses. They're all an individual pose, so that's nice. Here, we're going to use Dorado skin over a Zenithal highlight. They have some really good Caucasian skin tones in the set as well. And then we're going to paint his trousers oak brown and this sort of tabard or sort of half skirt that he has on deep gray. Now, because these are meant to be cultists, and just sort of like the rabble from across the universe, the lunatics that they could just gather like flotsam and jetsam, there's going to be no specific uniform. But we do want them to look a little unified visually on the table, so we're going to limit our palette here. It's going to be this brown, the gray, and this red, and we'll work those through all 10 of the Chaos Cultist models, but in different areas. So on the case of the leader here, we're going to paint his hood in this red so he stands out. But on this cultist, we're going to paint their trousers red. And in the case of this cultist, they have a red top knot and a red shirt. We're going to move these all around, just sort of interchange them so that they have a visual coherency, but they don't look like they're wearing a uniform. When we move on to our metallics, plate metal across the bolters and all of these sort of improvised, brutal melee weapons. Once we have our base colors down, we're going to start shading. Here, using strong skin shade, this is another tone that's in the box, and it's really good if you use it the right way. It's easy to overdo, and it sort of has this sort of strange umber color to it, as opposed to a warmer color. But in this case, we want the cultist to look a little sickly, a little strange, a little dirty, so it actually works out really well. We'll use dark tone over everything else, though. So we're just going to apply dark tone to the trousers, the boots, the capes, the weapons, the pauldrons, any improvised armor, the grenades on their belts. We'll use that all around there to bring out the details and shading really quickly. Again, this is a chaff unit. Like, you just put handfuls of these guys on the table and they die right away. So we don't want to spend a ton of time trying to ice these guys out like they're going to be on the box art. Now, once our washes are dry, I'm going to go back to that Dorado skin, and I'm going to hit the highlights on all the muscles on the top surfaces, anything from the top. You see the muscles on the lower back, underside of the arms, we're going to leave those. That lets them fall into shadow. And then we'll go back through with pure red. Now that the dark tone has sort of knocked everything down, we're going to bring their highlights back up. In this case, I'm going to hit the edge highlights here with that. And we'll do the same thing on the pants with oak brown. We'll go back to that pure color, bring out the top of the pants. Now, here's a chance to use one of the technical or effect paints in the kit. This is called Fresh Rust. We're going to use this with a lot of water on the brush and just put that in the recesses of any of the weapons. And these guys are lunatics. They're not going to take care of their stuff, so we want that rust to set in. They haven't been maintaining their weapons. They've got better things to do than that. And then lastly, back to this really great True Blood. I'm going to brush this on here with that old sort of beat up, battered brush to get an uneven look. And then to finish it off, we'll go ahead and use that trick. Here's a better view of it. You get the load of the paint on the airbrush and then blast it, and you get this great sort of splatter that goes all across him. It just looks like he's just mauled somebody like the lunatic that he is. Now, the bases here, of course, that set that I bought was only 32 millimeters. So I went to Cults, found this really great industrial base set, printed those out, and then I used those on both the Cultists here. And then, of course, if you were looking really closely, I used those on the Possessed as well. We're going to use a little super glue here because it is a plastic to resin connection. And as we apply them to the finished bases, that completes our combat patrol. And there you have it, the final Combat Patrol in a year-long monthly Combat Patrol challenge. To be honest, part of me can't believe that we're done. And I can't believe I've painted 12 of these things. If you'd like to check out the other 11 videos in this series, there is a playlist on the YouTube channel. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to help the channel grow, please like, comment, and subscribe. Drive us to the front page of YouTube and help grow our audience. Or you can always check out our Patreon linked in the description below. Joining at any level grants you access to our private Discord server where like-minded hobbyists help each other out with honest and kind feedback every day. Thank you again for being with me through this incredible year-long journey, and I'll see you on the next one.